Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go over some housekeeping for today. So welcome to our monthly webinar series, Building Native Agriculture, Sowing the Seeds of Growth Through Capacity Building, presented by the Native American Agriculture Fund in association with Chris Roper and his team at the Indigenous Ag LLC. Today's topic is standing up infrastructure. If you have any questions to ask, please do so during the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen in your Zoom account. You can type in your question. We will answer them as we conclude the webinar. We will be sending out a PowerPoint of this presentation and the webinar recording and a link to register for the next webinar in the series via email to all registrants the next day. I hope everyone enjoys this excellent opportunity, and I will now pass it to Sandy Martini to introduce our presenters.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Whitney. I get the pleasure of introducing today's presenters. We have Chris Roper. He is a graduate of OSU with a degree in construction science, and he spent 15 years managing different construction projects. They range anywhere from 1 million to 200 million in size, and they include large-scale ag projects, hospitals, school facilities, casinos, hotels, condominiums, convenience stores, meat processing facilities, greenhouses, coffee roasting facilities, microbreweries, and animal feeding and processing facilities. He began working with the Quapaw Nation, where he oversaw all construction projects for the nation and began building the tribe's now multi-million-dollar agriculture programs. Chris is joined today with Shelby Crum. She is a program manager with a master's in public health from the University of Oklahoma. She began working with Chris over 3 years ago and has experience in various agriculture projects, farmers markets, food sovereignty, analysis, surveys, reports, project and grant management. And welcome, Chris and Shelby. Take it away.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Sandy. We appreciate it. We're glad to be here again today. I'm glad everyone could join us. Hope your weather is good. Our thoughts and prayers are with all the folks out in the west and northwest with the wildfires. I get to talk to a lot of folks all over the country, and I know a lot of folks are dealing with the smoke, ash falling out of the sky, and even some are in the affected areas where the wildfires are. So if you're out there, and just know our thoughts and prayers are with you. If there's anything we can do to help any of you, please let us know. We'll start our webinar today. It's based on standing up infrastructure. As we continue through this webinar series on the third Thursday of each month, we want you to know that we're going to continue to go backwards just a little bit and recap what we've done, but also continue to move forward and try to assist with different ideas and thoughts about standing up infrastructure. How can you get your facilities up to speed? So if there's things that you want to see, things that we're not hitting on that you are interested in, please let us know. We'll try to accommodate your requests, or we'll work with you one-on-one to try to answer your questions and make sure you're getting what you need, through NAF and through ourselves. So next slide, please. Our agenda, again, we're going to recap the previous webinars. We're going to talk a little bit about the Reimagining Native Food Economies report. Hopefully you all have seen that now. If you haven't, we're going to tell you where you can find it. We're going to talk about assessing infrastructure needs, site selection, utilities, planning, any kind of facility. Seems like we focus a lot on meat processing, but really any type of facility that you're planning. It can be a greenhouse, it can be a hospital, but there's a lot of planning that has to go into these facilities so that you know what you're getting yourself. And then we'll leave a few minutes for questions and answers here at the end. Next slide. On episode 1, or our first webinar, we talked a lot about business planning, and we talked about food sovereignty assessments and gathering data. So hopefully, if you haven't done that, maybe you have a plan for that. And if you need help doing that, again, please ask. Shelby's a great resource for that. She can also help direct you to maybe some folks in your area that can help. There's a lot of good surveys online that you can use, but you really need to find the needs of your community and your tribe so that you can help set goals for what is truly needed in your community. Next thing is the feasibility studies, understanding what things cost. Again, figuring out those needs versus costs. And that goes into the business planning, figuring out those business plans and can this really work? Can these ideas work and can they be financially responsible? Can the tribe sustain such a business on their lands? Or is it something that maybe you need to team up with somebody? There's been a lot of webinars and conversations about cooperatives and co-ops, over the last several months. But is a co-op right for you maybe? So we can help through that. Just things you need to think about and understand what you're getting into before you actually start to stand up infrastructure. Next webinar was on grant writing, helping to find locations, helping you to understand where you can find grants, how to plan projects, how to develop budgets. Next slide, please. Now, just this slide here is really the first start of the Reimagining Native Food Economies. You can find this complete report on NAF's website. If you go onto the Native American Ag Fund website under resources, this full report, I think it's about 30 pages, is on that. You can print that off, go through it, study it. This model is something that a lot of different groups are looking at and using, investigating, if you want to say that, on how you can really break down the food needs in each area. Now, obviously, 10 regional food hubs ultimately is not enough. There's going to have to be other sub hubs under that, but we all have to start somewhere. And we were talking a little earlier about how can you start with something in your community? Some people are starting with gardens. Some people are starting with greenhouses. Some are looking at meat processing. There have been several meat processing plants that have been stood up over the last 12 months, believe it or not. And there's many, many more in the planning. But overall food distribution and tribal trade has been on the forefront. How can a tribe in the Midwest get fish from the Pacific Northwest? And how can that distribution system be made better to get tribal products from one area to another? And, this regional hub model is one way to do that on top of many other things that it can. Next slide. In the Reimagining Native Food Economies, it goes through a lot of types of brick and mortar costs that go along with infrastructure. Now, construction costs can vary, and most of all of you have probably seen that since COVID hit. We were just chatting again this morning about how hard it is to get certain products, all the way down to furniture, and how long it takes to get furniture, how long it takes to get electrical supplies. Some of these products are many, many months out. So when you're thinking about your planning and thinking about standing up your infrastructure, one of the things you have to look at is these long lead items that you may have to purchase early so that it meets your schedule. We're talking about brick and mortar cost for infrastructure. We're looking at meat processing, food, vegetables, specialty crops, grain, the fisheries, poultry, eggs and dairy, warehouse and storage, food waste, packaging, logistics. Logistics is a really logistics and trucking really go together, but the logistics of getting products from one side of the country to the other is a huge cost in the food industry. It can triple or quadruple the cost of a commodity by the time it gets to its final destination. And then the other ancillary costs that go along with that. Next slide. Meat processing. This is a big topic, and we continually hit on meat processing just because there's a lot of meat processing projects that are either in feasibility studies, they're in maybe looking at their business plans, or actually might be in construction. So, comment there on sound. Hopefully you all can hear me a little better. I'll speak up a little bit. Meat processing is in the forefront of a lot of different regions right now. So we really concentrate on that more. But if there's other folks that need to see something else besides meat processing, or you're looking at other opportunities or standing up infrastructure for other food processing, please let us know. We can focus on that a little bit heavier as well. Currently, 70% of tribal producers raise cattle. So investing in meat processing is one of the most critical aspects for advancing Native American agriculture. Federally inspected processing is a topic that everyone is looking at when you're looking at meat processing. So with federally inspected processing, that means that that product can go across state lines and go from state to state. There have been some recent changes in some states, and I think it's a total of about 12 states, where they allow the state inspected product to be transported across state lines. So, if you're in varying states and you want to know if a state inspected product can go across state lines, get with us and we can help determine that. A lot of these plants are looking at multi-species processing, looking at beef, bison, elk, sheep, and pork. There are also other processing types with chicken, fish, and even the general food processing that are looking at the packaging of produce and fruit as well. Next slide. Assessing your infrastructure needs. So with this, you want to go back a little bit with some of our other webinars, and you want to make sure that you have done your upfront work. Did you do your food sovereignty assessment? Did you do your feasibility study? Did you do your business plan? Because all these things are going to help you determine what your needs are and what your costs can be. So, what's it going to cost to build? How much is it going to cost to operate? How many employees will it take? Where can funding come from? Where can we build it? And do we have the infrastructure needed available? Those are all questions that you're going to hit along the way of these processes that we've hit already. So the food sovereignty assessments, you're going to help determine what resources would be offered in your community. What are your people telling you that they need or that they can't get at your local stores? So what are you most concerned about when purchasing food? And are you concerned about chemicals, hormones, et cetera, used in food productions? All of this information is needed to assess your infrastructure needs. You have to know your customers and know your community. Next slide. Whitney, are you hearing me okay?
Yes, it's a little bit choppy, but I think that we'll be okay.
Okay, all right, I wanted to make sure. Where is your customer base? So a lot of these customers that you're looking at, are you looking at strictly your own tribal area? Are you looking in your community? Are you looking at processing food that could be for third parties, or are you going to co-pack? Co-packing is a big industry. It can be in the produce industry. It can be in the meat processing. It can be with your fish. Co-packing can mean that you're packing product for other customers, and it could have their label on it. So this is a business decision that you have to look at, and you have to know what that facility is going to process, how it's going to be packaged, and where it's going to go. So please make sure that you're really thinking through what products this facility is going to be producing, processing, packaging. All these things have input on your infrastructure. Knowing your land base, land selection. We wanted to just touch on this subject of fee simple land, trust land, and fractionated land. For most tribes, this is an issue. You have to make business decisions on where your food processing is located. Is it going to be on fee land or trust land? If you're going to be on fractionated land, how are you going to deal with all the different things that come along with that? So all things you must think about just to pick a site. So I know it sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of things that you must look at. Next slide. Again, on site selection, utilities. If you don't have utilities, you won't be very successful in your processing. Utilities all consist of your water, and you want to make sure you have ample water. When you're thinking about building codes and facility needs, you have to make sure that you are, one, supplying enough water to meet the facility needs for food processing. Two, that if you have a fire code requirement, you have enough water there to meet that fire code. Another one you want to think about is redundancy. If you have a single water source that uh, goes out or gets shut down for any reason while you're in food processing, that could shut down your operations. So the reason redundancy is listed at the bottom is because you need redundancy in every one of these utilities, not just water. If you lose water, do you have a storage tank that you can pull out of in case of emergency? Do you have a backup water line that you can finish out your processing for that day even? Sewage, very similar. In a meat processing facility, you have to deal with other things like um, the blood that can come from the animals, and some municipal sewage treatment facilities cannot handle the blood. Some of them cannot handle the fat particles that come through a meat processing plant. So we need to think about these things and figure out how to design systems that can take care of your needs based on the site you have in the community you have. So different regions are going to have different rules. Different cities will have different rules. So we need to be thinking about all those things. The electricity. Most of these food processing facilities are going to need three-phase power. So if you're in a rural area that only has single-phase power, we've got to think about how we're going to get power to that facility. How are we going to have enough power to generate the coolers, the freezers, the large equipment that it takes to process this food? Do you have gas available, whether that's propane or natural gas? A lot of these things that we have to look at. Can we go back one slide? I'll finish up a few things on that first. Sorry. You want to make sure that we're identifying the products that are going to be made, the equipment that's going to be used to make that product, and then the utility that it's going to take to run that piece of equipment. So as you can see, it's a process that you must go through to make sure that you have everything you need to be successful in that facility. We bring up broadband because in so many of these rural communities, there's no internet. And if you don't have internet, one, we couldn't do webinars like we do today. And a lot of the equipment that we have today takes internet to function properly. So we've got to really focus on the broadband and have it redundant so that when one primary source goes down, we have a backup coming in from somewhere. Okay, next slide. On the utilities, there's different types, and you can go into a lot of different types based on your area. Some of you will have different capabilities depending on where you're at. If you're close to a city, you're going to have more options available. If you're out in rural America, miles and miles from a town, you're going to have a lot less opportunity for, to have different selections. But for water, some of the availabilities can be a well. I know some of you can't drill wells. Some of you have rural water, some of you have municipal water. But again, you guys are going to know your areas better than I do probably. But again, we can help you understand what it takes to run some of this equipment. The water usage, you're going to really have to understand what it's going to take to run equipment, what it's going to take to process animals or food, what's going to happen with that water once you disperse it and do the operation you're doing. Are you going to collect that again and try to filter it and reuse it? Is it going to go into a waste system somewhere? There's a lot of talk, obviously, in a lot of communities about water collection and reuse. A lot of communities are already collecting rainwater. So if there's things that you can do and think about, well, again, we need to bring all those to the table as we're planning infrastructure. Sewage. talked a little bit about that. Municipal sewers cannot always take the discharge from a food processing facility, and more specifically meat processing. We need to think about what happens with the actual waste, the gray water, what treatment, what codes. There are many facilities I've looked at that have septic and aerobic systems. Some of them are in combination with a lagoon. So sometimes you might have multiple systems on your site just to take care of the overall need. And those are all costs that must be factored into your facility. Next slide. Talking about solid waste. Solid waste can include the offal. That's going to be what gets trimmed off of an animal. It can be your hides. It can be bones that can't be used. It can be the internal parts of the animal that don't get used. Most areas have a rendering facility that can take that. You do a contract with them, and they would pick that up, typically weekly. There are some alternative usage of the offal. There are some incineration methods that can be used. I'm working with a couple of groups that are looking at tanning hides. So that's a subject that has been talked about in several different regions. Nobody likes to have to send hides to a landfill. The market for hides is pretty bad right now. It's unfortunate, but we definitely have to find better uses for these hides. Under the gas section, propane or natural gas. Typically, natural gas is much cheaper than propane, but a lot of these rural areas don't have natural gas available. So if you're in a remote area that doesn't have natural gas yet, when we look at equipment and how we're going to operate equipment, and when we're looking at propane, we have to order the equipment to match that propane requirement, but we also have to look at the long-term cost for you in the operational cost to know how much that propane is going to cost you on a monthly basis. So, that can be an operational cost that gets pretty expensive, certain times of the year. Obviously, if you're heating with it, if you're running different types of equipment, it can be a long-term cost that we really need to think through. Your electricity needs, your capacity of the area, what your needs, and then how much is available. As I mentioned, in most places, you're going to need 3-phase power. And if you can't do that, we'll have to design and try to get that power increased. But again, that's going to be a long-term operational cost that we need to evaluate, help you evaluate. It's one thing to get a grant to build a facility, which is what a lot of us do. We'll build a facility, and then when you're looking at the long-term operation of that facility, you're trying to figure out where that money comes from to operate that facility, your monthly bills or annual cost. So we need to be thinking about that early on when you're talking about standing up infrastructure. Your broadband abilities. A lot of people even have trouble. You build a building and you do have internet available, but once it gets in the building, that internet is not able to be widely used inside a facility because some of the food processing has cooler walls, insulated walls, steel roofs, steel buildings, so Wi-Fi may not work. We have to think through the processes of how you get that internet into each room of a facility. So is that a wired process, or can you design some other access points that will get internet into all parts of your facility? So all things that must be thought about. Next slide, please. Planning the facility. I know this might be a redundant slide, but in every webinar we've had, we want you to be thinking about, what are you going to make? Where's the product going to go? Are you going to be feeding your kids at a public school? Are you going to be putting your products in daycares? Are you going to be trying to put your products into the your Title VI programs, your elder programs, hospitals, restaurants, grocery stores? Every one of these needs packaged differently. And I know that can be a surprise to some folks, but it takes almost a different piece of equipment for for institutional use versus retail use versus portion cutting and portion packing. As you can imagine, for the difference between a daycare versus a school, kids don't, those small children don't eat as much. So you can't send a half-pound hamburger patty to a daycare. Most people don't think about those things. So, and the same thing for an elder program or your Title VI programs. Food is prepared differently, and it's fed differently. So we have to think about all of these things. You think about a grocery store and you think about the packaging that goes into a grocery store and what a family is going to pick up out of that display case when they're buying meat for their meals for their family. You're looking at different types of packaging that must be planned, and this goes for your fruits and vegetables as well. You can't do a large bag of lettuce or squash or something like that that would go into a grocery store that a family's going to buy just to feed their family for a day or two, versus a school or a hospital that can take those larger vacuum bags. Next slide. Well, it kind of snuck up on me, the questions there, but again, this is all meant to think about what it's going to take to stand up your facility. And we want you to be thinking about all the different ways that you can do it, all the different things that you're going to make, all the different people you're trying to serve. And I'm fortunate to be out in the Northwest this week and seeing a lot of different infrastructure that's being put in place out here. So when you get to share what tribes are doing across the nation, it's wonderful to see all the great things that are happening. But to go back a little bit and think about the reimagining the native food economies, if you'll read that report and think about how we can link all tribes together, how can we link the tribes that are growing corn or growing tomatoes or growing beef and bison and fish? How can we link all those tribes together to be, more self-sustaining, more food sovereign, more food secure? That's what this is all about. So, again, I mentioned before that most tribes I deal with are really interested in tribal trade, but we all must cooperate to get this tribal trade started and to make it sustain itself. So please, if you have any questions, please share them with us. And if you ever want to get in contact with us, you're welcome to reach out, email us, call us, and we'll definitely work with you and your group to try to get everything you need answered, or we'll at least point you in the right direction to get those questions answered. Whitney, do we have any questions yet?
Just as a reminder, you can submit your questions here in the chat box and send them to our panelists. We do have a question, maybe just a little bit of a difference between trust and fee land. So someone had said that they have a cooperative on the reservation, and 2 of the members are operating on trust land and 2 are operating on fee land with sales to a business located on the reservation. Where do they fit in?
Catherine, I'm reading that now. It's ironic. I'm actually in your area this week, which is a nice coincidence. So 2 members are operating on trust land and 2 are on fee land, sales to a business located on the reservation. Well, part of that depends on the ownership of that business. But if the owners on the business are on trust land, we would have to know if that is in control of the tribe. Indian owners, okay. We'll have to dive into that a little bit. There's different answers to that depending on other. If it's tribal owners on tribal land, I would think that could be under tribal control. But if it's tribal owners on fee land, they're going to fall under state jurisdiction with state rules, state taxes, all that kind of good stuff. But please reach out, Catherine. I'd like to dive into that deeper with you. My cell number is 573-247-8181, and my email is croper@chrisroperservices.com. We'll make sure that we share that with everyone, and you're welcome to reach out on that. What was the next one? Did you have another one?
I think that also your contact information here on the slides, we'll go ahead and try to project that
Okay.
so that
Okay.
everyone has, yep, there we go. That way we have your number and email address on there as well. So if anyone has
Yeah.
questions, they can reach out directly.
Yeah, please do. I'd like to hear from you because I've actually been working on some Umatilla scenarios this week with some different processors that I work with out here. So it'd be great to talk to you on that. Are there any more
Great.
questions? Whitney?
No, and I think what we'll do, just as a reminder to everyone, that this is not the final opportunity to ask questions. So if you have questions for our team or for Chris or Shelby, feel free to reach out to them, reach out to our team. We can connect you as well. What we will do is we will provide this presentation because I think there's a lot of really helpful information in there. So we'll get that out to everyone who registered and attended today via email. So be on the lookout for that. And if things, as you go through it again, potentially, if you have questions that come up, you can absolutely get in touch with all of us.
Yeah, and Shelby, was there anything that I missed that you know of that we need to talk about? We have a small group, which is good to sometimes we can be able to dive into different subjects. But were there other things maybe that you're working on that be relative to this?
No, I think you hit most of everything that I was thinking too. I just wanted to like re-emphasize, you did say it at the beginning, but that the meat processing and that process that we went through and answering all those questions about how to plan it out, that's applicable to all of the different brick and mortar type of buildings that you would build as part of this food hub or outside of it. Whether it's a farmer's market or a hospital, like Chris said, or a grocery store, you still need to know what you're trying to do and who you're trying to serve and what they actually want. And so you can go back and review our other webinars to talk. We went into a lot of detail about business plans and food sovereignty assessments to make sure that you understand that.
Sure. And be sure that you all are following grants.gov as well for some of the new grants coming out. There are some grants that are coming up due here pretty soon. The HUD ICDBG ARPA grant is due in a few weeks. The Department of Commerce EDA grants are open right now. So these are some that we're following and working on with different groups. But if you're looking for funding, please get on grants.gov and check out. There's updates every week. So don't look at it once and close it back out. Be sure you're following that.
That's incredibly helpful. Thank you, Chris. And I think that we'll also include the link. I know Shelby had a really great presentation during our last webinar about applying for those grants and how to find that information. So we'll be sure to include that as well. But
Sure.
Unless there's any other final questions or any closing final thoughts from either Chris or Shelby or Sandy here, I think that wraps up our webinar for today, but we look forward to having you back here. The third Thursday of every month we'll be here, and the next one's going to be on labor and training opportunities. So we're looking forward to having you back.
Yeah, thank you. And if anyone has any other ideas or topics you'd like us to hit on, please share those with us.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.